Thank you, everyone, for joining this VIP roundtable. Thank you for being VIPs. Everyone is very important here, but you're a little bit more important. um, my name is Javier Jase. I am the managing director for Benzinga Cannabis. This is my 10th year with the company, believe it or not. And I haven't aged one day. That is not true. Today we're gonna talk a little bit about cannabis media. Many of these media panels, we've done many together, in different combinations here. They usually focus on how to get media, which we won't disappoint you. We'll give you some pointers there. But we wanted to have a wider ranging discussion about several topics that relate to how media portrays cannabis. And we have amazing panelists here with very different perspectives, financial, more cultural, industry publications, mainstream media, and a mix of it, actually, a little bit of everything. So I would love to have our panelists introduce themselves. I know them well, but I think they would do a better job at sharing a little bit about who they are, what they do, how long they've been in the space. And many of them here have been long-time inspirations and mentors in diverse ways. So very honored to get to moderate them today and keep them in line and in time. Deb?
All right. I'm Deborah Borchardt. I'm the executive editor and co-founder of Green Market Report. It is a cannabis financial news website. We focus on the financial news of the industry. We celebrated 7 years online last month. I co-founded it in 2017, and we were acquired by Crane Communications in 2021, October 2021, so 3 years ago this month. And before that, I worked at TheStreet.com with Jim Cramer. And before that, I was on Wall Street as a VP at Bear Stearns. So that's why I bring the business angle to my reporting.
And sorry, can you give us a little bit of a context of what Cranes Communications is for those who weirdly wouldn't be aware, but...
That's quite all right. So Crane Communications is actually a 100-year-old publishing company. They are family-owned. They're on the third generation, which is fairly unique in this media world. They focus on B2B titles. They own, I think, 26 titles. They own automotive news, Ad Age, modern healthcare, precision medicine, which is for oncology. I could go on and on, but that's what they do. They try to find a niche in the market and then just own it so that the people within that market, it becomes their Bible. And so their hope and goal for us as Green Market Report is to become that Bible on the B2B side for cannabis.
Hello, my name is Bill Levers. I am one half of Beard Bros Farms, and since we're talking about cannabis media, I'll go with the cannabis part first. First started cultivating cannabis late 80s, early 90s, was raided in 1990, so I've been around this for a long time. My brother and I left the East Coast 2010, made our way west because you could still go to jail on the East Coast in 2010 for cultivation of cannabis. We landed in Los Angeles, built a name for ourselves as a quality producer of medicine for everybody. The pivot, the media part for us is relatively new. In 2018, we were tired of having our Instagram deleted and all these shadow bans and things happening. So we started a weekly newsletter so our people could find us when we got deleted the next time. We also started a website and we started producing our own content at that time, April 20th of 2018. So it's an easy date to remember. During that time, we had lost our ability to operate in the California market because Prop 64 was bad. So we concentrated more on media. Ironically, the pivot to media got us much more well-known than just growing quality meds in Southern California. And so I'm just honored to be here on this panel with people who are very, very well-versed in media and much more knowledgeable than myself.
My name is Eugenio Garcia, and I'm the founder and publisher of Cannabis Now magazine. We started in 2009. I was a political science graduate and wanted to focus on emerging markets. So I worked for Whole Foods Market for about 10 years in Berkeley, California, and kind of got my eye on the next emerging market, which was cannabis and hemp. And so I started Cannabis Now as a medical journal, and quickly pivoted to a national title that is focused. We endeavor to focus on lifestyle and the enlightened user. So we love storytelling. However, we definitely keep our eye on the business end of the industry, and very happy to be here with you all.
Are we allowed to clap? They're all so great.
Oh yeah. As long as you don't heckle, you can do anything. Free.
Thank you for clapping. My name is Dr. Sarah Brittany Somerset, and I started the first cannabis and dedicated drug policy news desk at the United Nations in New York. Thank you. But I started out as a cub reporter for High Times magazine in 2007. I was living abroad in Jamaica, and I would bother the publisher by constantly sending him photos of pictures I took of weed, and eventually got him to, wore him down and got him to let me to be like a sort of roving reporter. And then I came back, and with that experience, I eventually parlayed it into a news desk. I was a reporter at the UN, and then I was part of the UN Press Corps, and then became a bureau chief of a drug policy desk. And I've also had the great pleasure of occasionally contributing to both the Green Market Report and Cannabis Now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Paredes. I'm Director of Business Initiatives for Hearst. And these days, it's all about cannabis for me. So we founded last year a full-service agency focused on cannabis that props up greenstate.com, which, if you guys know who Hearst Media is, in 2017, we founded greenstate.com out of our San Francisco offices as a B2C consumer-facing news. So different than Green Market, more about like, what are the differences between CBD and THC? What's, this whole deal about intoxicating hemp on there? And really, I'm a stand-in for the great Rochelle Gordon on there, who's off celebrating her new marriage on there. So I'm just thankful that you guys let me sit up here with you guys and hang out.
Same question is for Devin, and then we'll get into the actual panel. But can you give us a little bit of an overview of Hearst as well? Because I find it interesting, right? When we talk about cannabis publications, they're their own animal, but then the mainstream media backing of cannabis news organizations is not very common. So contextualizing a little bit of these media behemoths behind your respective publications, I think is interesting, to provide some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you guys don't know who Hearst is, we're also a 175-year-old company, still owned by the Hearst family. You might see Hearst Tower or Hearst Castle if you're ever out in Northern California. But we're a major media conglomerate. We're actually the largest media conglomerate. We operate in 44 countries right now. You probably either watched one of our networks on television, like ESPN, Food Network, A&E. Maybe you've bought one of our magazines, like Cosmo, Men's and Women's Health. And then, of course, it started all for us in the newspaper space we own SF Gate, Connecticut, the two major Texas papers, San Antonio Express News, Houston Chronicle, so very diversified in there. And then what's exciting about a company like Hearst is, right, we're not publicly traded on that. So we own almost 300 companies and very diversified in what we do. We own a lot in aeronautics and logistics and health. So cannabis just made sense, right? Why we've been in business for 175 years is we tend to, hockey player here, skate where the puck's going to be versus where it is.
Cannabis makes sense, and yet common sense is the least common of senses. And talking about your experience at Hearst, I think it's a good segue to start a discussion around mainstream acceptance and how the role of the media in shaping and transforming public perception around cannabis. So I would love to get your take on that evolution, and then your take on how much is mainstream media, traditional mainstream media, really embracing cannabis. Feel free to rant.
Well, I'll tell you this. Again, I'll say this world according to Jason on here. I think that you can't build a new industry without education on there. And I'm a big believer. There's a guy who wrote this book a real long time ago called The Fusion of Innovations, right? Why things catch on and what's the timeline for things catching on. And if you look at like what we've done with coverage, right? Green State was honestly just a newswire that we came in to, prop up the industry, and we didn't really know what we had until Rochelle Gordon came in and really just revolutionized that, like the partnerships we've made with like Google Discovery and everything. It's all her on that, but there's this belief within our organization that education's key, right? Like if we have to report on it, good, bad, indifferent, but we have to make the American people aware of what's out there. And that's why I'm happy. Like Green State now isn't just greenstate.com. It's literally put into all of our news sites on that. So those stories are coming up. And then we're seeing what it's done is it's empowered our editorial staffs at all our major publications to cover the industry, right? And cover it sometimes at a micro level. Like I mentioned, we had newspapers, what's going in those individual communities, what's going at the state level. Some of the big media that we own, like Cosmopolitan and Men's and Women's Health, like how does this affect my health, right? Is smoking cannabis, is that the same as smoking, tobacco? And so I look at it as being we could be a really strong outlet with what we do on that consumer facing like B2C space.
The rebranding of marijuana to cannabis is probably the most successful rebranding I've seen in my lifetime, which isn't long, but almost 35 years, I think. I've seen some attempts to rebrand, and really the transformation of marijuana, pot, wheat, the devil's lettuce, whatever you want to call it, to cannabis was incredible. And I'm thinking, how do you see, Britt? How do you see the what was the process to get the UN to kind of embrace this sort of content, right? In an era where the rebranding was barely starting.
Well, it wasn't easy. So when I first entered the UN in 2011, we didn't want to put High Times magazine on my application because we thought that was too much of a red flag. So we used the parent company, Trans High Corporation, which was just sort of ambiguous enough to not scream like drugs. But obviously every application gets reviewed by the internal media department, and I sat down with them, and they couldn't pull up the website at first because it was blocked by the UN servers because of the content. So I think that was the first hurdle, and then I had to show them on my phone what the magazine was about, and then they said, "Oh, so you're like a drug magazine?" And I said, "No, only cannabis." And they said, "Oh, but that's a drug." And I said, "No, it's a plant." So this is how the discussions began, and they thought, "But what are you going to cover here?" And I said, "There's so much to cover here. There's the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. There's the International Narcotics Control Board. There's the World Health Organization. There are so many committees within the United Nations that make global decisions, or at least global recommendations on drug policy, that how can we not have a seat at this table?" So I guess my argument was cogent enough that they put me on media probation, and they gave me a temporary access badge, and I've been there 13 years, and I still have a temporary access badge, and but I also have a bureau and a desk from which to work, which is very helpful. And in the beginning, it was really funny. I don't think anybody knew what to expect. So I would go into these meetings, these press corps meetings, and I would hear people talking about, "Have you met the drug reporter yet? Have you seen the drug reporter? Where is he? Like, where's the drug reporter? Did you meet him yet?" And I'm like, okay, he's a she. And I just made sure to blend in. I think I went a little bit overboard in the beginning. Like I was very buttoned down, very navy blue suit, just trying to be inconspicuous. And then that in itself caught attention because people were like, "Oh, "You're the drug reporter? You're not what I expected." And I would say, "Oh, well, my Bob Marley t-shirt's in the wash. Like, all I had to wear today was this suit. I'm sorry." Like, there were a lot of preconceived notions that I would just be like this, incoherent type of person. But then after a while, when people got to know me on an individual basis, like, they realized I was absolutely no different from, like, the AP reporter or the Reuters reporter. I was just another reporter. My beat just happened to be drugs as opposed to any other foreign policy. So then it just kind of worked out.
I can attest to the prejudice that surrounds all of this and the preconceptions. The first time I got a check from High Times magazine, maybe like 8 years ago or something, my bank, which I won't name, but it rhymed with Waze, uh, closed my account. And then they found out how much money I was making, and they called me back 2 years later. I don't know how they found out, but or maybe they just changed their policies. And
At least you got paid.
Yep. Well, it was a different time. And then the other one is, like the prejudice around clothing. My mom is now 76, and I gave her a joint for the first time in her life when she was like 64. And the police drove by. This was in Argentina, and it's like I told her like, "Hey, just hide it, hide it." She looks at me and she goes like, "I'm a 5 o'clock tea kind of lady. I'm 64, and I'm wearing navy blue and white. They will not detain me." And that stuck with me. And ever since, when I went anywhere to talk about cannabis professionally, I wore navy blue and whatever, uh, light blue shirts. There's definitely a prejudice. How do you approach, or what's the story with Cranes? Again, same thing. It's a very mainstream, very traditional business publication embracing cannabis like full on. It's not like, hey, here's a little vertical, you got this little column on the side of the newspaper. What's the story? And again, how do you feel that you build that narrative and we get to that moment where a century-old media organization comes to accept cannabis as something that is mainstream, that is acceptable, and that can be business conducive and productive?
Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning when I did work at the street, I was doing cannabis coverage back then, and this was like right before Colorado legalized adult use. And when I did that work reporting on these stocks, I was told, "We'll do it at the end of the day when your other work is done." And so, which was fine, and that's how I covered it. But they just, it was like most mainstream media at the time. It was, you know, the cute puns in the headline, and they never took it seriously. And that was one of my goals with Green Market Report, was to take it seriously. And when Crane wanted to have exposure to the cannabis market, because they felt too that it was going to be a huge industry. I think mostly because the grandsons of the original founder, they're youngish men, and so they could relate. And so for them, there wasn't the stigma that you're seeing. But I think it's also worth noting, Javier, that it's we think we've made steps forward, but if you guys are subscribers to the New York Times, you'll notice lately, maybe we haven't made some steps forward, because their reporting has tacked hard right, which is kind of interesting to see. It's kind of a little. I mean, I think overall the New York Times is tacking right anyway, but they've had a slew of negative cannabis stories in just the last few weeks, so it's just been kind of surprising. Hopefully they will reverse course. I mean, Hearst reversed course, So I mean, you guys, I'm sure, know the history of Hearst and having the reefer madness stuff, and now here they are embracing it. So there is room to change.
And I definitely celebrate that too, right? Changing hearts and minds. I get a lot of crap. I've gotten a lot of crap over the years for providing a platform for these converts. Oh, how do you dare provide exposure to John Boehner, who's suddenly behind this because of the money? I don't care why he's behind this. Like, as long as we
Smoke
need,
a joint
we
and
need
chill
the
out.
support. We smoke a joint and chill out. Exactly, and that is a perfect segue. To what I was thinking about asking to Eugenio, and it's the cultural side of it, the lifestyle side of it, also plays into the normalization and destigmatization of cannabis from a different angle, right? Inserting it into this lifestyle that can be healthy, that can be glamorous, and how do you feel that you've played into this narrative over the last 13 years, and how do you maintain that balance, right, between the mission that you have, the core mission, right, what you really hold in your heart, which is helping destigmatize cannabis, and the mission, like the express mission of the magazine, which to a certain extent is to educate, but also to entertain, right? It's a delicate balance.
Absolutely. Our technically in our mission statement is to entertain and educate. So that's literally what we try to do with our entire editorial process. Going back to the original question that you had, we actually started our magazine as Cannabis Now for a reason. We didn't want to say marijuana. We wanted to have the future word of our magazine be reflective of the future vibe of the industry, which was more of a positive vibe. But in the early days, we were really excited because there wasn't that much media on cannabis, so we could get away with breaking news and talking about education where you couldn't find it anywhere else. In 2012, we were actually the first cannabis magazine to be accepted nationally in the airports with Hudson News. And when we tried to break the story about that, the USA Today actually broke the story, but they wouldn't do it alone. They, at the same time, Playboy had also changed their business model to have non-nudity on their cover, and they made us, they put us together in the story of like Vice magazines now available in Hudson News. So in the early days, it was for us more news heavy and more, I guess, education. What is cannabinoids, et cetera. Now what we have found, because there is not only a plethora of endemic, amazing media outlets that are very business focused or very education focused or internationally focused, we have tried to really hone into the DNA of people and storytelling about the human beings in the industry and who are using the cannabis. And we have found that by focusing on that DNA of the human nature of this, that we have had a positive reaction to our content by humanizing it in a very specific way.
Lovely, love that. What about you, Bill? And we'll have a follow-up question, but I want your take on this as well. Like, how do you go at, excuse me, English is a second language. How do you go at, cannabis journalism, right? Coming from the grower background, but not necessarily doing content just for growers, which was like a forum or high times kind of thing, right? Where it's like tips and tricks to avoid getting mold,
Well, I mean, for us, education was a major factor. For my brother and I, the stigma's different. We were cultivators and got raided. So it's much different than just media pushback on the stigmatization of it. And so we've always taken that as kind of a challenge, but we also feel that the primary goal of media, that everybody said, is education for people. The reality of it is, with it being so clandestine, people just had all these rumors and innuendos, and like you said, they would make jokes about things like that. And so we've just always wanted to educate the consumers, and as being a brand, it also just went along with what we were trying to do. We can educate people, they trust us, they'll use our products. And so we've taken somewhat of a different approach. It is interesting, though, the conversion to cannabis, but if you look at Google, marijuana is still way above cannabis on the search results, like way above it. So we can't stop using the word marijuana, but I say cannabis in my daily life. I don't actually know why. I don't actually know why I do that, but when I'm speaking, I say cannabis. But when we're writing, we tend to use marijuana just because it's going to show up better for our media. But again, just the educational part of it is what interests us. And as cultivators, we were doing cultivation stories first, but also as people who were working within regulations and within different markets, we recognized that people around the country wanted information, and you couldn't just give it in a certain area. So we started covering the entire country on regulations and laws going into effect and things like that.
Now, I'm going to stay with you for a second, right? As we pivot to social media, that's another like tricky area, right? Most of you here know that especially meta platforms and TikTok are not cannabis friendly. There's a lot of different barriers that you need to circumvent for content to work. And you had a strategy that was social media heavy, but at the same time, you acknowledged pretty early on that the social media audience is a rented audience. It's not yours. It's not yours. It belongs to the platform. If you get deleted, it's gone. Fun tidbit. There's we have a sister company in Latin America called El Planteo, and we're currently in legal actions with Meta, and we have our final hearing on October 24 for the deletion of one of our accounts. But you are focusing on informational content. You are not trying to sell anything, and yet you were getting closed. How do you navigate that? And for people in the audience also, how can they navigate this, especially when you have a brand or you have a product and you can't sell it, but you need to tell a story about it, and the line is fine, and the algorithms don't fully recognize what is sale and what is information.
Well, for us, it's been an interesting journey. We started using social media to sell our weed in LA, and so it was on Instagram, and that's literally, I can't tell you how many brands were built in Los Angeles on Instagram between 2010 and 2015. You would literally find dispensaries that you would just get into their DMs, you'd show up with product, and they'd buy it. So you were expanding your business, and Instagram was really friendly. We started our Instagram in probably 2012-ish, and by 2021, when they deleted us, which is why we started our newsletter in 2018, because they kept deleting us, we were up to almost 120,000 followers. And so we've always just used social media as a means to point people back to our website. And so Instagram was where it was at from probably 11 to 18-ish. But I'll tell you right now where it's at is LinkedIn. Let's be real. I could literally put a price up of my product on LinkedIn and nobody's deleting it, and it's going to go through and people will buy my product.
But who's using LinkedIn?
I was going to say, LinkedIn is the new Instagram. If Instagram was hot in the early teens, LinkedIn is it in the early 2020s. Guaranteed. I mean, I meet people here daily, and it's funny because now you're actually meeting people with their real names instead of SpongeBob25 as their Instagram name or whatever it may be. So it's very interesting when you actually put a face to a real name rather than having to ask them what their name is. But social media is, in my opinion, social media is a means. It's like you said, it's rented, but it's a means to point people to what you own, which is your website.
I would add that, on our traffic, I would say we get more traffic percentage-wise from social media than we do in organic search. And when we started Green Market Report, we got flagged on Facebook and got taken down, and we had to spend something like $1,500 with a consultant who just had a friend that worked at Facebook, right, and got us unflagged. And we haven't had any problems since then. But they accused us of selling drugs. And we're like, we're telling the news. We're not selling drugs.
Meta hates us.
Cannabis now has almost 4 million followers on social media. It's mainly on Facebook. We do extremely low amount of activity across all social media. However, we do post our content consistently on X, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, but we do not touch Instagram almost ever. We were verified on Instagram, so we're one of the few cannabis companies or media companies that's verified on Instagram. And a lot of clients will come and be like, oh, we'll pay you thousands of dollars to do this, and we don't take the money, and we don't even really promote our stories. We just let it sit there. Just to hold that space. However, on Facebook, we do promote our content, but I advise all the clients that we work with that actually they should use social media aggressively, but not for cannabis. They should develop a lifestyle platform that is truly about the life that the customers that they're trying to interact with would appreciate, and leave cannabis out of it. And that way you can aggressively, whether it's a clothing line that you have or it's different events that you want to promote, but really try to engage in social media, but leave cannabis outside of it and really just focus on the ethos of what you're trying to communicate to the customer.
I was going to jump back in real quick. That's literally what my brother and I did by accident. We created a lifestyle brand because we were showing people the events we were going to and the cannabis that we were smoking and the people that we were hanging out with. And so we by default basically started a lifestyle brand to where people see Beard Bros and they associate it with Jeff and I and the things that we do. So you're 100% right.
Speaking to your earlier point, though, about how he was lumped in with Playboy and like Vices. So, like, you know that I was on the Forbes desk. I wrote for Forbes about cannabis for a few years, as did Deborah prior to me, as Javier still does. And one of the things that never really sat well with me was that they always lumped it in with vices. Cannabis was grouped under vices. And, you know, you take your platform where you can get it, but it never really sat well with me because I felt like this should be under healthcare. I don't think this should be under vices. And it just was very tongue-in-cheek. You could tell, like, yeah, we're giving this a platform because it gets clicks, but we're still not really taking it seriously. Whereas Fortune, who I would say is arguably Forbes' main, you know, competitor, they put it under healthcare. So I think that's where really it should be. And, you know, I've tried to utilize social media also, to your point, but I've had my Instagram shut down so many times that I've just given up. Like, I had Cannabis Correspondent, and all I did was post my articles. That was it. Just for the haters who were like, your work is behind a paywall, I can't read it. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be behind a paywall so publications can make money. But, you know, I would just kind of maybe screenshot the first paragraph and put that on, you know, my Instagram, and it was just shut down, and I just gave up.
Yeah, I think when we look at social media, it's a very powerful tool, but you have to understand who the audience is there, right? And what the platform's really about, right? I see a lot of brands, a lot of dispensaries, right? They post something and they mirror it across all the social media platforms, and that's not the right way to be doing it, guys, right? Instagram, it's in the name. It's meant to be instant, right? On that, it's not meant for long form content. Facebook, like, we get a lot of hits on Facebook still because that's long form content. What Bill was saying about LinkedIn, that is a very powerful platform, and again, built for long form content on there, which again, with us being in the media space, that's what we primarily produce is longer form content on there. The other thing that I will tell you is when you're looking at these bands and you're looking at these pieces, right? Like, you're pretty well informed today on what like these platforms will allow and what they won't allow. And I will tell you, one of the things that we've seen work really well for brands and operators, right, is sponsored content, right? Because if you're doing that type of work and you're doing content, you can then use those platforms, right? More so because you're not promoting your product or your business, you're promoting education, you're promoting an article now. So again, that's what I would tell you to kind of like in the realm of that, think about the audience, and think about what that platform's purpose is.
You automatically gravitated toward the next topic I wanted to touch on which is like the business of media, right? Which is complex. In the past, people would go buy a newspaper. It was understood that you paid for news, and in recent years, that is no longer the default. Even myself, working in media, many times will go to a newspaper, see that there's a paywall, and go like, screw this, I'll find the information somewhere else instead of paying $1 or $5 to get past the paywall. And it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge, and especially for cannabis, where there is still a lack of information, and there's still like not enough media outlets and media organizations covering the business and the plant seriously and responsibly. It's a challenge to balance, providing the readership what they need and what they want with, keeping the lights on, with making the business profitable. Because we all love this, but we also got bills to pay. And it's a tough balance, right? How do you approach the challenges of monetizing media? And if let's do this kind of exercise where we talk about the viability of media as a business, imagining that there's some investors here.
Yeah, it's a pretty much like whack-a-mole. Something that works in media to make money. You get all excited. Okay, now digital advertising's working, but then it suddenly isn't working. So then like we were doing events, and events were working, bringing in revenue, and then COVID happened, so no events. Now we had to pivot to digital advertising. So that was working until it wasn't, and then it was back to events. And then now sponsorship for events dried up for a while, so it was like, okay, now what do we do? Luckily, the digital advertising kind of came back. And so we're constantly trying to find that sweet spot. And I'll tell you now, we're going behind a paywall probably sometime in November, because we've got really good writers, and they deserve to make a living. And we're not getting the financial support we want from, or would like to get from, the cannabis community. So it's frustrating. And I know that's probably going to piss a lot of people off when, like you said, they go to look at that story and now they're going to have to pay to get behind the paywall. But that's just the reality of it. It's certainly frustrating for us in the media to see, MSO that makes, $1 billion a year in sales, and you go to them and say, hey, can you spend $5,000 to sponsor this event? And they go, no. And you're like, you sell $1 billion worth of cannabis a year, and $5,000 is literally a rounding error for you. And they'll tell you no. And it's like, okay. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, that's usually my line at a conference is, I don't know what's harder to run, a cannabis company or a media company, because every time you think you've figured it out, it shifts again. Yep. But, you're a journalist because you love what you do, and I've got an amazing team, and everybody loves what they do, so we just want to keep this thing going, and we hope that, people will sign on and come along for the ride with us.
Well, that's funny because I'm doing both. I'm running a cannabis company and a media company. So I know, right? Honestly, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to go back to the newspaper days. Can we get away from the 24-hour news source where everything's breaking news? That would be great. I used to like it when you got your news, a couple times a day and it was real news and it wasn't just a bunch of fluff. For us, what we've done is we actually did our media from 2018 till probably about 2021 until we even monetized it at all. It was really more of a passion project, educating people. What we've recognized since then is we need multiple buckets. You need an event bucket. You need a sponsorship bucket. You need people putting ads on your website or on your newsletter. You need to do, and then we have a product line as well. So the only way we're making it is because we have multiple buckets. The product line helps out with the media. When the media falls a little short, the media helps out the product line when the product line falls a little bit short. But yeah, overall, it's just a matter of pivoting and recognizing what the market is. And like you said, the event's dried up. You have to find something else. And so it's just media for us has been a constant morphing from the time that we first put our first article on our Beer Bros Farms website.
I think the reality is that there's not a lot of people out there that care too much about cannabis media unless they are in business or they are medically motivated. So the stoners, I guess, or the daily users of lifestyle, they don't really want to sit in front of digital properties or physical properties and be entertained by cannabis media. It's not the same as watching a cooking show per se or like sports. So the challenge is real, but I think the trick is to find the businesses that are doing super exciting things and to tell those stories in an authentic way that not only can translate to the potential customers, but also the other business owners, and then you have a fighting chance. So you kind of have to be a hybrid of the media to survive.
I also think that the concept of supporting cannabis media should come from cannabis consumers in the sense that, everybody laments when a publication falls by the wayside, and we've seen countless, Civilized, for example. We've seen so many good media outlets with good, strong writers just fall by the wayside because people aren't supporting them. And then people go, oh, that's a shame. Oh, but I don't want to buy anything because it's too expensive. I mean, you can literally take $10 a month and support multiple publications across that. And I know that sounds really far-fetched, but if you can get the New York Times for $2 a month, the Washington Post for $2 a month, and you can get the New York Times for $4 a month, you can support a cannabis publication just as easily. And you can support Vanity Fair and the New Yorker for $6 a month. You can support a cannabis publication just for the simple fact that they need your support. And I don't think people really see it like that. And a lot of people in the room are altruistic and they give to their causes, like their Save the Whales or whatever, but they don't think of like cannabis media as something that really needs their support, and it does.
Well, I think too, right, we all manage P&Ls, right? Everybody in this room probably manages a P&L and understands the ebb and flows and the shifts on that. But it's a difficult world we live in, right? The 24-hour news cycle on there. And it's hard to pay for something that maybe you've never paid for in your lifetime. Like you just had television, right? We had the channels, and then you had cable, and now we have 24-hour news cycles. You got that newspaper, and yes, you paid for it, but it was minimal and it was quality, right? It wasn't fluff on that. It was what you were coming at. So it's a very, razor thin line. And I think that's why I like cannabis and I like media, because right now all of our margins are razor thin. So it comes back to perception and value, right? And building a platform that has perceived value and then being able to show that value, being transparent with that. And I think that that's something that all media, not just what we're doing in cannabis, struggles with right now, is giving that perceived value. I mean, we talk about the 24-hour news cycle. How many of us have to go to 3 or 4 news publications daily just to get what we think are the facts? Right? It wasn't like that 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so what I see as an opportunity for what we do is to be the news, right, for this industry and to tell it, how it is. Not how we'd like it to be, but how it is. And I think if we can do that and bring the value to not just the people right now in the industry, but to the American people, right, to go, okay, this is new. My friend uses, my coworker uses, right, like, where can I go to learn pieces? And that's what I'm excited about, what we can bring to media from all these different perspectives.
But if we really, really tell it how it is, then we're in danger of losing or alienating potential advertisers. And I have to give 2 claps to Deborah, because I find that her platform is one of the few platforms that has no F's to gives in terms of telling the truth.
No, I second that. I was just in an investment in this room a few hours ago talking about the investing in cannabis, and I would actually say one of the biggest challenges for cannabis media is actually the federal law on cannabis. The fact that companies cannot go across borders easily is a real problem, because especially for a media outlet like mine, which is a national magazine. So we try to tell stories that someone in Florida or Texas or here in Chicago will all resonate with. However, if the client's only doing business in Florida, they only want to be distributed to people in Florida, and someone in Florida might not really care about what's going on in Chicago. So it's really hard for us to partner with brands that are regionally focused because we're not a regional outlet. So a little bit of our strategy is to maintain and learn and be prepared for when the market arrives. Then we can also grow to the next level.
Have several other topics. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add the part about, if you have a product that's got special value that people will pay for it, they'll gravitate to it. And I think that is really key. And that, to your point, Brittany, is kind of one of the things that we have made our special sauce, is that we go beyond the presser and we dig into the files. And I mean, I have to just digress real quick, but I had been covering this company. I'd worked on Wall Street, so I can smell a skunk a mile away. And I started working on this story on this company called Bright Green. Oh my gosh, what a mess. Red flags everywhere. I'm just like, holy cow. And I've written several stories about this company, and the New York Times just did the story on that company, and they've got the picture of the CEO in front of the cultivation equipment. That cultivation equipment has not changed in 3 years. They have never grown a plant. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You got these guys, you have now given them credibility. They're going to go get more investors. They had to return their cultivation equipment because they didn't pay the lease on the equipment. And the New York Times is running this company with a picture of the CEO in front of his cultivation equipment that has never grown a plant. And I just was like, as you can see, it's still making me stutter at how bad that reporting was because they didn't go and look a little harder at these jackholes. And so someone like you who's really growing a plant and really legit, this guy's on the New York Times and he's
Well, I was literally just going to say,
saw that story.
I-
I was just like,
I did not, but it doesn't surprise me because they just paid the New York Times to say what they wanted them to say. The difference between the people that are sitting up here is we know cannabis,
Yes.
and we're not going to just platform somebody who's a flop. We would never do that. And so the reality of it is the people that actually engage and have been involved with cannabis know who they are, but the New York Times doesn't care. They just took their $5, $10, $20,000 and wrote the story.
Oh yeah, and that is very important, right? Like the importance of cannabis media is, this kind of reporting where we get what's going on here. And of course, there's many interests at play many times, but definitely non-specialized reporters and media outlets will miss all of the red flags. There was a case that was not as famous in the U.S., but was huge in Latin America and Europe. That was the Juicy Fields case. They did crowd growing. Same thing. They were like, and you went into their website, and the first thing that it said was, invest in cannabis. It's profitable. Yeah, right.
All the real ones ran. All the real people ran from.
Yeah, right. And you would buy a fraction of a plant, and 3 months later, you would get 300% return on your investment. And every mainstream media outlet in Latin America and Europe was fascinated with the story. It was like the rise of all these cryptos and all that, and they were like, oh, this is so cool. They're merging crypto and weed, and it's the best platform in the world. And all my friends, smart people, by the way, were reaching out, hey, should I invest in this? That sounds great. And, I got a friend who actually got his 300% return. It's like, yeah, that's how a pyramid works, bro. And, being in cannabis, I saw that and was like, that was a very first red flag. Invest in cannabis, it's profitable.
Aren't they the ones that parked the wrapped Lambos outside
Exactly,
of Cannabis? That
yeah.
should have been the first red flag.
Yeah, well, but that was the last red flag, actually. and I sat down with them in Uruguay 3 years ago or 4 years ago, sit in front of the German guy and the Swiss lady, and I go like, well, I gotta ask you, I'm gonna open with this, but is this a scam? And don't take it the wrong way, but if something sounds too good to be true, it tends to be. And they got super mad. How would you say that? And I'm like, well, I mean, for starters, I don't know of any profitable cannabis company right now. They were like, what do you mean? It's like, none of them. Literally none of them. And the other one was like, okay, where are you selling? Because if you're growing in Portugal, who's buying the weed? It's like, we can't disclose our investors, we can't disclose our funding, we can't disclose our price. Are you selling? And the answer ended up being no. Lo and behold, 2 years later, they are all in prison. 3 years later, now they're all in prison, deported, blah, 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 blah. But, just to support that point that Deborah made, and we are tight on time, and I want to do the crowd pleaser. So we can do like a quick fireside round and maybe like 5 minutes of Q&A, like the ticks and trips, do's and don'ts, the famous pot peeves that we once discussed. How do you get into media and how do you not get into media? I mean, definitely promising returns in a pyramid scheme is not a good way to get into at least our media outlets, but other do's and don'ts.
Well, I think when you're looking for earned media, right, being succinct, right? Don't send us 1,500 word, press releases and expect us to, run those. We don't have the time to read those. I'm just being honest, and they are packed with fluff, right? What we were talking about, right? News cycle on that. So again, I think it's important for you guys to be succinct. You want to be probably no more than 300 words. You want to have a really good headline of what you're what the purpose of this is, and get it out. The other part of it is, I've heard Rochelle say this, right, where you want to do some paid media, right, to go alongside that. Even before you try and do the earned media, right, we all read that stuff. So if you're putting out stuff you're willing to pay for, that's good quality pieces, then when you send us earned media, we're like, oh yeah, we know that company, and yeah, we've read the other pieces they put out there, so we'll watch it more in our inbox.
I agree with what you said. Like, if you have to remember that the person you're pitching is getting hundreds and hundreds of pitches from people. So if you can't catch our attention, like in the first paragraph, we're not going to read 18 paragraphs to get to the point. And also, like, a little things like if you have assets, and by assets I mean images, videos, anything to substantiate, anything visual, then you should include that. You don't need to send an email like, would you like me to send you photos? Well, if you're sending the pitch, send the photos. If I want to use it, it's already there. I don't have to ask you for it. It cuts down on time. You know, a lot of times also you can send a press release under embargo. If you have a trustworthy relationship with a journalist, you can say, this is under embargo. We're not going to release it till Monday morning, but you're helping the journalist get the jump on what the news is going to be on Monday morning so we can prepare it properly. If we have to get it off the wire and then it's kind of a race, it gets like lost in the shuffle because you don't know what else is coming off the wire that day. So giving people like a heads up is also really, really helpful. And I do agree that earned media is very important because when you pitch someone, you're asking a total stranger to do you a favor, right? You're saying, help me get my company on the map, help me make money. Well, why should you do that for someone you barely even know if you're not even going to be willing to support the publication that you want to appear in? It's a symbiotic relationship. Like if you support the cannabis media, they're going to remember that and go, oh, that's the person who helped us on this. Maybe they're launching a new product. We should take a look at that. And that's how your paid media becomes earned media.
I think that it's really important for companies. Of course, it depends on what size they are, but in that first level of development, to invest in somebody. It can be the founders, but somebody who is hyper focused on community and communications. And even if you have an agency, have somebody on the inside whose their entire job is to communicate your message to the public. I think it's critical, and it should be right there, maybe even in front of marketing or right beside it. Because you have to have that champion out there, and you have to have the person who every single day is passionate about your company and your product and being available for the news outlets when they come to you, and also respectfully communicating to the news outlets what's available for them to coverage.
I would say for us, what we talk about as far as earned media goes, it has to either be interesting or helpful to the community. Or they're a friend of ours, or they're charity. Everything else for us kind of falls under paid media, right? Like that's how it should be. And so, being in the industry and understanding it gives you a big advantage on all those pitches coming in, because we wouldn't have put one up for Juicy, whatever they were, or this company you're talking about. But that's what I would say to people: make it interesting, be our friends, or have some charity that you're wanting us to promote that helps the community.
I would also say do your homework. Don't send a pitch to a company a media outlet that doesn't make sense. So we're finance and business oriented. So sending us a story about a medical study, I'm just going to throw it away. It just doesn't mean anything to my audience. So do a little extra homework on that. And if you can, be proactive. If you know there's an event coming up, plan ahead. Email that outlet and say, hey, I know that there's a hearing in D.C. on Friday about such and hemp. We know this about hemp and would love to give you that information. And so, because it takes us time to write these stories, so if you can get ahead of it and send us information a week in advance, that's super, super helpful. Or if you've got, if you know something's coming up, let's say rescheduling is going to be announced on Wednesday. Your client has to, if you're in PR, if you're not in PR, you need a quote that is either pro or negative. Pro that decision, negative about that decision. If you like the decision, here's your answer. If you don't like the decision, here's your quote. If you've got both of those quotes ready, when the answer comes down, the decision or whatever, boom, you send out that email. We do not want to get an email 3 days after an event saying, oh, would you like to speak to my CEO about rescheduling that happened 4 days ago? No, I don't. I don't have time to do the interviews either. So don't send me an email that says, hey, would you like to talk to our CEO the day that it's happening? No, get the quote, send it. Just send it. If you just send the quote, half the time it's going to get included because we just don't have time.
And I think, to summarize a little bit of what you all said is, understand what we do. Get to know us. Get to be your friends. And friends doesn't necessarily mean friends like we get together to smoke a joint, but like be your friends. Be willing to support us, but also understand that it's not a quid pro quo, that none of this will ensure coverage, that you do not buy the coverage, but all these things definitely increase your chances. because you understand what we're doing. You understand us, what we care about, what we like, and you know how to support us. That will definitely make us a lot more inclined to providing the coverage. We will still dig to see if what you're saying is legit. We will still check if the product is good, if it's safe, and if not, we will call it out. But the chances will definitely increase. We could go on with this forever, but we got 5 minutes left, and I want to open it to some public Q&A. Okay, instantly. Go ahead.
So Jeff, we've talked about this quite a bit. Are you guys leaning into or understanding the blue ocean strategy that's developing in the true medical side? So I'm talking about the work that's coming out of Israel, where they just found 30 new cannabinoids. They're not even named yet. In the state of California, we have the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at UC San Diego has been funded for 24 years. Now UCLA, UC Davis, UC Irvine, they're all getting hundreds of millions of dollars to find new, novel therapeutics with cannabis plants. Nobody's reporting on that. Nobody's even talking about what.
Do they have a publicist and has it been pitched? When you say nobody's reporting on it, there's always a reason. Either it hasn't been pitched or none of us potentially write about medical. Because even though cannabis is a niche market, it's not a one-size-fits-all. To Deborah's point earlier, if she covers the business aspect and someone else covers the cultural aspect and someone else covers the medical aspect, you need to find the science writer who covers the medical aspect and put that in front of them. Someone else might just cover CPG. They might just be reviewing the top 10 vape pens. They might not be writing about new cannabinoids. Their audience, like a High Times audience, might not even care what the difference of cannabinoids are. Whereas other people, like you mentioned out of Israel, like the Tikkun alums of the world, that's their whole jam. So you need to get in front of the reporters who cover medical and science.
Yeah, I would.
Pitching a story.
Uh,
I'm just saying in general, it's just not covered.
But if you want it covered, that's how you get it covered. Somebody has to pitch it, or we have to independently think to research that.
Yeah, well, just like we were talking about before, cannabis itself is not extremely profitable with everything that's going on, as well with media. So the reality to your question is, we just don't have time to do all the research I would actually like to do to write about things I'd like to write about. Is the actual answer. So it has to be pitched. To her point, it has to be given to us so that it then piques our interest and we can then dig in a little bit more. But the answer to your question is going to be 99 times out of 100, you're not going to get a reporter just to dig into.
To reach the reporters you want to reach. And that's why you need a publicist, because the publicist has spent years building those trusted relationships with cannabis reporters. Now, I can count on one hand the publicists that I actually trust and work with, because I've been lied to too many times by publicists who are like, oh, we've got the biggest, bestest, that goes into our pop peeves thing. As soon as a publicist lies to me about a client, I'm done with that publicist. Nothing they're ever going to ever say about any client is going to resonate with me, because if I have to unpack your pitch and I realize it's dishonest, I'm not going to publish something that's going to put my job in jeopardy because it's not honest. So honesty and authenticity is the most important thing. We've all received renderings from companies that pretend that they're photos of places that don't exist, because if we write about it, they're going to garner investment. These are things that we do not want to do. So if you're making something in your kitchen like edibles and you're like, I make great edibles, find a publicist that has a stable of edibles companies and try to join that, because that person will position you with those companies.
Lovely. We're unfortunately out of time. Give it up for our wonderful panelists. And